So to follow up on a video the other day on deadlift tips, I want to do a squat tip video as well because squatting is probably one of the more overanalyzed lifts when it comes to the big compounds. Not to mention the fear of failure with this is a lot higher. For example, failing with deadlifts is not a big deal. You just go pick up the bar, and if you don't pick it up, then that's it. It stays on the ground. With benching, you just push it off your chest. But with that too, you're typically not using as heavy of load as you would be with squatting, unless of course you're skipping leg day, which if you are, don't do that. So what you're seeing here is a set of 2 at 505, which for my body type, structure, height, age, whatever, it's pretty good for me. So I'm gonna share some tips that I have found to be beneficial and hopefully will help you translate over to a better squat. So first things first, with grip width, what I find works best for me is using actually the same grip that I use for bench press, so a little bit wider than shoulder width. This allows me to put the bar into the position of my choosing, which for me is right on my rear delt. It allows me to get my elbows under the bar without my wrists flaring back too bad, and allows me to feel pretty strong overall. The problem with going too wide, for me at least, and I think a lot of people will have this problem, is it doesn't allow you to create that rack that the bar needs to rest on, regardless if you're using your rear delts or your traps. As you can see here, the bar has a lot of movement, and this is with no load whatsoever on the bar. Now on the flip side of that, going too narrow can also be a problem because in this case for me, it doesn't allow me to get into the right position. Now true, it lets me get my elbows under the bar and my wrists aren't flared back hardly whatsoever. However, in this case, again, it's not in my desired bar position. So play around to find out what works best for you. Now speaking of getting into good position, one of the things I see a lot of people fail on is getting the bar out of the rack properly. A lot of people use a split stance, which I don't understand why. It expends a lot of energy, not to mention it's not very safe. So get both feet under the bar. As you can see here by this blue line, the weight is exactly splitting down the center of my foot and the strongest part of my foot, giving me the most balance. Now unracking is another thing. This is something similar to what people do with bench. You want to make sure your rack height is correct for you. What that means for me is a rack height that allows me to get into the proper bar position on my back, feel comfortable, and use as little energy as possible getting that bar out of the rack itself. One of the problems I see a lot of times is people either go too high or too low on these, and the problem with going too low is the fact that yes, you can probably get into a very good solid position, especially if you're a low bar squatter, but you're also going to extend a lot of energy just lifting the bar out. And on the flip side, going too high could put you in an awkward position, not only for the unrack, but re-racking as well, which is never good, especially if you're lifting alone. Now to follow through with that, expending as little energy as possible, try to make sure that you're only taking really 2 to 3 steps, as little as steps as possible, especially when you're using heavier weight, because again, you figure you have several hundred pounds on your back, you're taking steps with it, you're walking, and then you want to do reps after that. The less you walk, the more efficient your squat's going to be because the more energy you're going to be able to conserve. And speaking of conserving energy, let's make sure you got your balance and breathing right. And this is something that's very important and probably has helped my squat the most over the course of the last year, just learning how to breathe properly. You'll also notice before any squat, I get myself settled and balanced to make sure that I'm not swaying too much and make sure that the bar isn't getting me out of position. Now, in order to fortify the best position possible, talking about our feet, what I find works best is to stand as if you were going to do a vertical jump, go up on your toes, flare your heels out, then go up on your heels and flare your toes out. For me, this is the most comfortable, and I found this is true for many people as well. But again, play around with different stances and find what's most comfortable and allows you to get the deepest overall. As we talk about settling and balance, what I find really works best is as I'm squatting and as I'm getting ready here to really picture the load of the weight going into the middle of my foot. Now we talked about this before with that blue line. The center of your foot is probably the most strongest for most of you. This is what I really try to focus on when squatting. And a tip that I found is really helpful for beginners is to either use a bench as shown here or even use a box. And the reason we do this is because most people aren't comfortable squatting down with a heavy load on their back and their form breaks down. But if they know that they have a safety net in place, I find that their form gets much better. And I discovered this as I was taking a poop one day. I found that getting to depth and squatting down to the toilet was quite easy, yet doing it in the gym was a lot different. So if you help utilize these tips, and I know there's quite a few of them in here, but just some real simple things that you can do to ensure that you're squatting more efficiently, I think you'll find it helps. As I've mentioned already, it really does depend on the individual, and I spent way too much time reading books and trying to change my technique based off of what other people said, when in reality, if you find what works best for you and just stick with it and work at getting better at it, I think you'll find you'll have better results overall. As always, I appreciate you guys watching, and in the meantime, stay big.